Hello and welcome to Human Ascension with Ellie. It's easy for us to be fooled into thinking that we are moving forward in a straight line into the future of our existence. After all, isn't the past, behind us, kind of where this picture is? Wouldn't we have to turn around and face behind us in order to find the things that have happened in the past? Isn't the future in front of us? Can't we almost see it if we're looking straight ahead? We have each been born into a world where the understanding of time is that it's linear or straight by nature. The past is behind us, the future is in front of us in a straight line. But it isn't straight. Life is a cycle, and everything around us is proof of that. Life is a cycle that continually revolves around and around, not necessarily a perfect circle. I mean, in some cases, there might be a perfect circle. I don't know, that's destined to repeat itself exactly the same as it did before. But it is far more likely to resemble a tightly wound spiral, traveling in a circle that's slightly different than the cycle before it, but close enough for us to be able to see that we're living in a cycle nonetheless, so long as we are around long enough to observe that complete cycle. Our realm of reality is full of examples of this spiral-shaped cycle of existence. To illustrate this, let's look at the example of plant life. So in the case of perhaps a fruit tree, the tree begins its life cycle from a single seed or bulb. The seed sprouts and the sprouts grow until they've broken through the soil and emerge to continue growing upward in the open air. Eventually, the sprouting seed becomes a seedling, and then a young, tender stalk appears, gradually lengthening and strengthening until it becomes a youthful tree trunk. Branches begin to form, and then branches sprout from the branches. As time progresses, the tree becomes large and thick with branches and leaves, and then budding flowers. The flowers bloom, and the petals drop to the ground, rotting and breaking down until they've been absorbed back into the soil from which they came. They nurture the tree and allow it to grow even more. And on the tree where the flowers once were, fruit begins to grow. Apples or pears or cherries or oranges or whatever. It doesn't actually matter, because regardless of what kind of fruit it is, it will grow and then it will mature and fall from the tree and begin to rot and decay until the only surviving portions of the fruits are those inner cores, which are, of course, the seeds or the bulbs that have been absorbed back into the ground and sit dormant for a while until it's their time to grow. This begins the process again and again and again, the cycle. But the next generations of fruit tree will be almost the same, but not exactly the same as the ones that they were born from. There will be a variation with every repeat of the cycle. It could be a change in shape, a slight variation in color. The fruits might be a little sweeter or perhaps a little tart in different generations, or they might produce in varying different shapes and sizes. Nonetheless, the cycle continues to progress like a spiral indefinitely, with new, slightly different experiences along the way and representing the unique aspects of every cycle. So it is also with the cycle of humanity. On a micro level, a child is born. They grow with the influence of their biological and environmental influences. They absorb everything that is blended from their parents' DNA and everything that they're exposed to in their life. They become an example of what fed them and allowed them to mature. And then those who contribute to the next generation and contribute to the birth of another child will pass their DNA on, which will blend with the co-parent's DNA and produce the next generation of child. Almost the same in many ways, but not exactly the same. And of course, the cycle begins again, and then again, and then again, just like the fruit tree. But that's on a micro level. It's the experience of a single human child. What about the macro level? What about the cycle of humanity? Because everything in reality is a cycle, and that includes the cycle of humanity. So, the scientific explanation of the ages of humanity is measured in a complex tapestry of linear, nonlinear, cyclical, and mosaic structures, each like a jigsaw puzzle piece that's been placed onto a large board, maybe like this one, and moved around until it seems to fit somewhere. Scientists consider that the progression of humans began with early primates, although the current school of thought is that perhaps we didn't exactly evolve from a particular recognized type of ape. It was Charles Darwin in 1859, actually, who originally stated that humans and apes had similar traits that kind of implied a close ancestral relationship. Darwin, however, did stop short of declaring that man came from the ape, perhaps for reputational purposes, I don't know, but the implication was often there. Every time something new is found in the earth by archaeologists or anthropologists, it's placed onto a puzzle board, onto that puzzle board, and a place is found for it somewhere. You know, the result has been a complex explanation of the various ages of humanity or ages of man. But considering that science is pretty hung up on only believing what it can, empirically prove, it seems to be very convinced of where humans came from, even though it doesn't seem to have discovered a perfectly connected timeline of the events of evolution just yet. But it does have its theories. So let's take a look at those theories really briefly. In evolutionary theory, there have been 4 ages of humanity that span around 6 million years. Predominantly, evolutionary theory relates to the physical or anthropological attributes of our species and how we gradually morphed from something that maybe resembled an ape into something that kind of resembles a person, although it depends on which person you're talking about, I think, at the time, because some people, I don't know, they're still a bit apish in their behavior. Contrasting this to Greek mythology. Now, Greek mythology also divides humanity into ages. There are 5 ages consisting of the Golden Age, the Silver Age, the Bronze Age, the Age of Heroes, and the Iron Age. I mention these ages by name because the description and understanding of them is kind of cute. You'd imagine that as a species, we would be progressing forward and getting better and stronger and smarter as time went on. But no, the way that Greek mythology describes us, humanity appears to be spiraling backwards and becoming less and less advanced with time. For example, the earliest of these 5 ages described in Greek mythology was the Golden Age, the most valuable, in which humans were believed to have an almost godlike divine existence. We lived in peace, and we lived in abundance, and we enjoyed a close connection with the gods. There was no need for laws or for any external kind of governance. Everyone acted with virtue, earth was abundant, and humans lived long, bountiful lives. A person could enjoy as much as 1,000 years of life during the Golden Age. Eventually, as with all great things, the Golden Age began to wear out because, as we know, humans are human by nature. So we began to take advantage of our environment and gradually became less and less virtuous. I guess because life was too easy and we got lazy or something like that. The Greeks believed that Zeus, who was the only surviving grandchild of Mother Earth, and Mother Earth, also known as Gaia, and Zeus was the king of the gods at this time. Well, they believed that he created the Silver Age as a response to the decline of humanity. Humans had become more contentious and less respectful of the gods. So Zeus took away our endless abundance and made it necessary that we work for our sustenance. They say he also shortened our lifespans. So no more 1,000 years of life. Although I have to say, I can only imagine how bad my arthritis would be after 1,000 years. And so I'm not sure that I'm concerned. I remember there's this movie that I loved, and this made me think about it from the 90s, I think. It was called Death Becomes Her. And I can visualize the scene from the movie at the end where these 2 decayed old dead women who'd been dead for decades, one of them falls down the stairs. and bits of her body starts to fall off. But that's okay. Her friend just sticks it all back together again with this stuff that's like spackle that you fill up the walls with. And then they sprayed her with a bit of fencing paint, fencing spray paint, to make her look human again. That would be me for sure. Definitely, without a doubt, after 1,000 years. Anyway, I'm giving my age away a little bit, so let's quickly get back onto the topic. And of course, from gold to silver, and then humans descended into bronze. And the Bronze Age represented a continued decline of humanity. Humans became warlike and aggressive. They learned to build weapons, and they engaged in endless conflict. They had little regard for the gods. And for the period of the Bronze Age, there was little evidence left for us to find today that would indicate that the gods had much of a direct involvement in human affairs at all. So, according to Greek mythology, all of the wars of the Bronze Age ultimately resulted in a great punishing flood, which was initiated by the gods, that wiped out the entire age of humanity, with the exception of a few very righteous people. Now, that sounds awfully familiar, doesn't it? I covered the Great Flood in episode 1 of this show. It's the episode that's called Convergence. And I talked about how almost every culture in the world seems to have a Great Flood story. Well, this is the mythological Greek story of the Great Flood, this major event in the history of humanity that gave rise to an age of heroes. Greek heroes, to be exact, of course, because I guess that's what they had to work with at the time. Names like Cadmus, Perseus, Bellerophon, and Hercules. Great heroes who slayed monsters and who we can often see depicted in some of the ancient Greek pottery and other artwork dating back to around 700 to 800 BC. And then, of course, last but not least is the Iron Age, because iron is pretty worthless compared to a hero, and especially when compared to bronze or silver or gold. And the Iron Age is the final age described in Greek mythology. It's the age that we currently kind of live in. It's also the last generation of humanity, and it's characterized by toil, strife, and decay. It's a time when virtue is very rare and injustice is the prevailing theme that runs throughout the age. The Greeks believed that humans were to be born at this time with a natural tendency to discard the gods entirely, and instead to live their lives, that were full of suffering and selfishness, weariness, and sorrow. A time when human decency would be almost non-existent. Gosh, like what a prediction. I mean, we know that it's not entirely true of today because, as we know, there's a lot of good out there, but there's also a lot of decay. I mean, think about modern days, just the combination of things like the greed of Wall Street, endless wars and other conflicts across the world, and the areas of poverty, inequality, and suffering that nobody seems to want to resolve. And then couple that with the frivolous nature of things like reality TV and super commercialism and whataboutism and conspiracy fear-mongering and things like that. It sounds a lot like the Greeks were pretty prophetic about their analysis of the current day, actually. And it's important to remember that while we're thinking about how far we've fallen in the eyes of our Greek ancestors, humanity evolves in a spiral, because everything evolves in a spiral. And if this is our final age, according to the ancient Greeks, then it might very well be time for us to return to a new and reimagined kind of golden age. Wouldn't that be glorious? So let's take a look at the ages according to the Zodiac, because there is a lot of evidence there out there that seems to indicate that humanity is presently in a transitional state and that we're careening enthusiastically down the path towards the age of Aquarius. Let's look at how the ages of the Zodiac work and maybe find out a little about each of the ages that have come before now, so that we can see if there is a possibility that we might be returning to something a little more golden than where we are today. There are 12 zodiac ages, which follow the 12 different signs of the zodiac. As with everything else we've discussed today, the zodiac ages are cyclical and continuous. Each age is approximately 2,000 years long, but this is only approximate, and that is because depending on the position of the planets, the length of each age can be measured between around 2,000 and as much as 2,150 years in length, thereabouts. For this reason, you might find that astrologers are often in disagreement about exactly how long each age is. So each zodiac age sits within a larger cycle called the 24,000 precessional cycle, which is otherwise known as the Great Year. Now, I'm going to be calling it the Great Year in today's episode because for me, it's just less of a tongue twister and so much easier because I'll be saying it quite a lot. The Great Year consists of two smaller cycles, each of which last approximately 12,000 years, which is based on how the Sun orbits the Milky Way galaxy. The Sun's orbit, just like the orbits of the planets and the stars, is elliptical, which looks like a slightly squashed circle. So there will be times when the Sun's orbit bring it closer or further away from the galactic center of the Milky Way. The ascending half of the Great Year is when the Sun orbits to a point which is closest to the galactic center. This is a time that ancient civilizations referred to as the Golden Age. Yes, the same Golden Age that ancient Greek mythology refers to, a period of around 12,000 years in which the Sun's close proximity to its binary point at the galactic center brings humanity into a long period of enlightenment and advanced consciousness. The reason for this is that the Sun's proximity and closeness to the galactic center allows for a magnetic radiation of greater celestial wisdom or power to be made available to humanity. But then, of course, the Sun continues with its orbit, and so, of course, things begin to change. After 12,000 years, it starts to travel on its elliptical orbit further away from the binary point of the Milky Way galaxy. And so the descending half of the Great Year begins, during which the Sun orbits to a point that is furthest away from the galactic center. As it continues to descend or get further and further away from the center, well, that's when humanity begins to forget its collective advanced consciousness. Going back to how ancient Greek mythology described it, the descent takes humanity away from the Golden Age, down into the Dark Ages. These Dark Ages consist of a somewhat darker Silver Age, and then further down still to a very dark and unenlightened Iron Age. By the time humanity has traveled through the Iron Age, it has lost almost all resonance with its celestial roots. Any celestial wisdoms and much of its consciousness has been sleeping for many thousands of years. The reason for this is the distance between the Sun, which of course is our life force, and also the representation of our God or Creator, and it's so far away from its binary or galactic center that there isn't enough magnetism to constantly feed our awakening. But then, as with all cycles of reality, the Sun begins to ascend its orbit once again, and as it does so, humanity emerges from the Iron Age and slowly progresses towards a new Bronze Age, and then a new Silver Age, and then the new, glorious, slightly different, because it is a spiral, Golden Age. So this is only approximate because we can only go by what we know from astronomical, archaeological, and anthropological findings. However, it seems that the Golden Age is the longest of all of the ages, and it sits above in the cycle, lasting 12,000 years. The shape of the ellipse of the Sun's orbit means that the cycle takes a bit longer than 24,000 years actually to complete. In fact, I think the exact figure is around 25,770 years. That means that the remaining 13,770 years are divided between the various dark ages. Imagine that the great year looks like a big circle. At the top, taking up nearly half of the top of the circle, is the Golden Age. And then on either side, traveling down, are the Silver Ages, and then the Bronze Ages, and then at the bottom, catching all the yucky stuff, is the Iron Age. So imagine we begin with the Golden Age and then slip down into the Silver Age as we travel down the circle and then down into the Bronze Age. And then at the bottom, we spend a bit of time in the Iron Age. And then we begin to move upward into a new Bronze Age and then a Silver Age. And then finally, we return to the top of the circle at the Golden Age. And then, of course, the cycle just continues to go around and around, like all of the other cycles of reality. And remember that scientists seem to think that humanity has been evolving for around 6 million years. So if that's true, that's a lot of different golden ages that we've experienced so far, even if we can't yet prove it with things like science. So the zodiac ages all fit inside this biggest of all cycles in our galaxy. And as we travel around the 24 or 25,000-ish year cycle of the great year, then we enter into each of the zodiac ages as we go. And each of those ages is approximately 2,000 years long, although some might be slightly longer, especially if they are in the descending half of the cycle. Oh, and it's also quite relevant to know that while all of this is happening, the zodiac signs are moving around inside the cycle. They're shifting by 1 degree every 72 years, which means that each time the cycle completes a revolution, any particular zodiac sign will have moved to a different place in the cycle. And because we are viewing all of this occur from the perspective of the sun's binary relationship to the Milky Way center, the ages appear to be moving backwards rather than the way that we would see them progress in an astrology chart, or if we consider, the direction of travel and dates relating to our horoscopes. But they aren't really moving backwards. It's just the way it needs to be perceived in order to be historically understood. Yes, this is complicated, but I'm going to tell you, only if you're trying to explain it in a radio show. Anyway, I look forward to hearing from you, and I wonder whether or not you think I'm explaining it okay. But let's carry on. I like a challenge. I don't mind. So let's look a little closer at the zodiac ages. Each age lasts around 2,000 years, and the transition from one age to another tends to be marked by the passing of an equinox. By that, I mean a spring or a fall equinox, during which the planetary lineup, and in particular the sun, become present in the new astrological age. So using this as a guide, we are currently at the tail end of the age of Pisces. We've been in the age of Pisces for just over 2,000 years, and we're traveling ascendant from the end of the Iron Age into the new Bronze Age. We may, in fact, already be in the first few degrees of the Bronze Age, because in recent generations, humanity has been awakening. The signs of awakening include things like accelerated advancement of innovation and technology, increased friction and rebellion, and a gradual increase in the percentage of people who begin to forego earthly traditions and rules and instead begin to look more closely inward at matters of their own spirituality, or they might begin to question what exists beyond the parameters of what they know in a tangible, measurable sense. Like an increase in the number of spiritual mediums, psychics, paranormal experiences, and otherworldly phenomena are all signs of an awakening slowly taking place around us. It takes around 200 to 300 years to be in transition between the ages. And if history is any kind of a guide, then humanity has been transitioning out of the Iron Age or the Piscean Age, or both, and has become ascendant towards a new age for at least 150 years. So we are very, very close to completing our transition. And the age that comes next is the age of Aquarius, which is the age that appears before the age of Pisces on an astrological chart. Or if you're using, the dates that chart horoscopes as your guide. But when it's perceived from the position of the sun's orbit around the Milky Way, then Aquarius is the sign that comes after Pisces. Just think of it in reverse. Let's go back a few ages in time and see how things have gone before, because this might help us to see what we can expect as our transition into Aquarius continues. I'll begin with the most recent cycle of the age of Leo, because it's the earliest age for everything we know about the Zodiac ages, Greek mythology and scientific artifacts and all the other proof that seem to coincide with each other. So I'm reasonably confident about the information that I'm sharing if I begin with the most recent age of Leo. So the age of Leo is estimated to have taken place between around 11,000 to 8,800 BC, approximately. During this time, the early equinox occurred in the zodiac sign of Leo. The sun gods of the time were worshipped as an expression of the divine masculine. Things like royalty or monarchy, government systems, and leadership power were all emerging around the world. Beauty and artistry were very important aspects of this age. Also, advanced technology. This is around the time that the pyramids were built, that the civilizations of Atlantis and Lemuria are said to or are believed to be thriving at this time. They were, in fact, believed to be at war with each other towards the later period and filled with corruption, greed, abuse of power, and selfish self-worship. It was at around this time that religious scripture that we recognize today talks of men who lived to be nearly 1,000 years old, and of civilizations that succumbed to evil practice and were subsequently destroyed by the wrath of God. It's believed that the age of Leo marked the end of the Golden Age and descent of humanity into the early part of the Silver Age. So the next zodiac age was the age of Cancer, which spans the period of around 8,800 and 6,500 BC. The divine feminine was worshipped as a moon goddess, and the moon was an important part of ritualistic worship that was represented in archaeological artifacts from around this time. What we can see is that the divine feminine and its relationship to Venus and the moon were central to the belief systems during this age. During the age of Cancer, humanity began to settle into communities that had less interest or reliance on governance and hierarchy, and things like family life, agriculture, and the building of community spaces was a prevalent feature of the time. Intuitive belief and personal perceptions were also important to the time. From around 6,500 BC until 4,500 BC, the age of Gemini included a shift in focus to a more intellectual period. Travel and trade began to flourish, industries emerged, the most earliest of which came from the East. Trading of bread, stone, and crafts became common. Humanity began to focus on the mind and the concept of rational thinking, along with handicrafts that could be bought and sold. The ceramics industry in particular was strong at this time, and ceramics from the age have been found in abundance in the Eurasian regions, China, and Malaysia. Intellectual pursuits like language development and writing began to emerge. Most of today's languages can actually be traced back to the age of Gemini. Humanity began to explore outside of its own communities, and trade networks began to develop between North America, the Caribbean, the Mediterranean basin, and east into Asia and Russia. The age of Gemini appears to have been a deeper settlement into the descent of the Silver Age, where we can see a shift in focus away from the divine gods and towards rational or tangible earthly pursuits. So after Gemini, the next age was the age of Taurus, which takes place between around 4500 and 2250 BC. The Mesopotamians invented money as a means of trade and also banking systems in which to store that money, to float loans, and also to collect interest. Small villages were turned into larger market towns. The previous ages had used bartering systems, but now copper was turned into the earliest known coinage. By the middle of the age, many of the market towns had become rich with import and export trade, and communities had been changed from family based to more wealthy or money based systems. This also had an impact on faith and belief systems at the time. Religions were bound to ideal concepts relating to money and wealth. It was encouraged to give wealth to the gods, and the idea of earthly representatives of the gods began to emerge. Temples became the center for collection and redistribution of wealth. Priests were the money administrators, getting a cut of everything, of course, and they kept records of the money transactions. The development of writing and rational mind that had begun in the previous age was further developed into business keeping systems during the age of Taurus. Another thing that grew in prevalence during this age was hierarchy. Classes of people from poor to rich began to emerge. Temples grew into massive pyramid like structures that could be physically seen for miles, but which also presented the pyramid structure of class. A few elite priests at the top, followed by a descending ranking system that was closely associated with affluence and influence. A bit like today, really, kind of. India's caste system began to develop during this time, and the world's celestially based calendars became organized around the time and year of the equinox and the solstice dates. Holy days were set, and religious rituals were developed and recorded to be sacred. Interestingly, the age of Taurus, with its newfound focus on structured religion, also marks a time of hedonistic worship. What a coinkydink. The pharaohs of Egypt would be buried with their wealth, and their servants would all be killed. They'd all be sacrificed so that they could continue to serve the master after death. Desires of the flesh, materialism, and the whole concept of seeking pleasure or physical sensations, also ostentation, they were all taboo, but also elements for worship. An increasing distortion of what was and wasn't good or bad seemed to depend on where in the hierarchy you were positioned. A little bit like today. So, archaeological findings show that around this time, similar practice to the Egyptians was also occurring in areas of North America, which indicates that migration occurred at this time. One of the most revered and worshipped aspects of the Age of Taurus related to fertility and the feminine form, giving credibility to the idea that the age was one in which the divine feminine was dominant. The age of Aries is believed to have been around between 2250 and 100 BC. It appears to have been a transitional point between the Greek mythological Bronze Age and the Age of Heroes. It was a time characterized by wars and empires, and it gave rise to courageous leaders. The monster slayers like Bellerophon, Perseus, and Hercules that we heard of before, they all came from this period in time. It was a very violent and destructive age. And it's also the time when it's said that the older matriarchal systems of governance were defeated and replaced with stricter, more dominant styles of patriarchal governance. Now, the Old Testament of the Bible was constructed close to the end of this time of Aries. Interestingly, God, who is often described as being loving, in these books of the Bible, he appears as vindictive, jealous, and very strict in his demands. He's portrayed like a general with an army that's fighting a war against rival gods, and anyone who doesn't comply is met with the harshest of punishments. During this age, the Chinese dynasties also switched from largely peaceful to highly militaristic, which initiated long periods of war in the region. Temples that have survived from this time show images of war and fighting as having been prevalent aspects of the period. The Age of Aries was a transition from Bronze to Hero Ages and a further descent to the brink of the Iron Age. The focus overall was that of power, individualism, and independence. The masculine warrior ideal was worshipped, and war was considered to be glorious. I'm going to tell you, I am so glad I wasn't around then, or at least insofar as I can remember being around. I'd be very happy to have forgotten that entire pre-incarnation completely. Definitely very happy about that. And so, from that point, from around 100 BC until today, humanity has been in the age of Pisces. We know the age pretty well because we're all living it, but it has evolved over the past 2,000 years. So let's get a quick rundown. Firstly, I'm going to remind you of something that I've spoken about in a previous episode when I've talked about that fellow Chris Bledsoe who keeps popping up. He's the UFO experiencer who was later visited by what he called the Lady in White in 2012. If you need to know more about Chris, I suggest you check out previous episodes of the show. But I also have a playlist of videos dedicated to Chris Bledsoe's experiences on the Ellie Dreams Down Under channel on YouTube. You can get up to date there at your leisure. So the relevance here is, well, Chris said that the Lady in White in 2012, when she came to see him, she first appeared to him as a bull that ran right over him. No, I don't think he was hurt, but I'm not actually sure about how that worked in a physical sense. But the important part of his story is that the lady appeared as a bull in the first instance. And Taurus is the zodiac sign of the bull. The age of Taurus was the last age during which the divine feminine seemed to rule the ways and beliefs of humanity. She was defeated by the masculine warrior divine of the age of Aries. And then she was suppressed in the form of Venus throughout the age of Pisces. It's like it was the girl's turn, but the boys cheated her out of her turn. It does seem a bit like that. And I think it's really interesting that Chris Bledsoe's experience of the Lady in White, who he also refers to as the mother of all creation, so maybe Zeus's mother, Gaia, from earlier on in this episode, also seems to appear to him as the bull from a time in which the divine feminine was last known to reign. That's the reason why I'm always so interested in his experiences. I wonder if it's connected to our transition into a new age. I kind of think or suspect that maybe it is. Anyway, the biggest influence of the Piscean age has been religion. It began to develop and build momentum around 600 years prior to the age of Aries and involved the introduction of concepts of wide-scale fear, prophecies of doom, illusion, guilt, and lack of human direction. Judaism was created and led to Christianity, and it spread throughout Europe. Islam also appeared at this time. And where heroes fought against monsters in the previous age, the reasons for war changed during the Piscean age. Now it became a war between good and evil, God and Satan, and the fight for the soul of humanity. Religions had beaten down the God worship of earlier ages, but now it was necessary for religion to fight religion. In order to do this and maintain sovereignty, the churches battled amongst themselves. So different Christian sects against other Christian sects, but also Christianity against Islam, for example, leading to a heightened sense of fear that permeated and grew throughout the Piscean age. In order to establish religious dogma, the church had to suppress other beliefs and faiths, including, things like splintering beliefs, but also women, non-believers, and ultimately also its own prior claims of a compassionate and loving Christ message. Religion became synonymous with war and violence. a reputation which is still in existence today. However, at the same time, something else was developing that appeared to contradict the growth and strengthening of religious dogma. Things like contact with otherworldly existence or dreams of a strange spiritual nature, and also spiritual defiance. These all became prominent themes as the age progressed, almost as though something was peeking through the fabric of reality and trying to get humanity's attention while we were living the organized life of existence in a highly structured or manufactured, very strict framework. Throughout the age of Pisces, there is evidence of people, whether it be the emergence of the great philosophers or the advances in science and technology, that indicate increasingly as time went on that there was more to reality than what we were previously able to see. Taoism was developing in China. Buddhism and Hinduism were developing in India. Warrior gods were being replaced with a new kind of transcendental reality that competed with a structured patriarchal framework of organized religion. Some of the Eastern faith systems included belief in reincarnation, connection with celestial principles not recognized in Christianity. The Piscean age appeared to be an attempt to maintain control over a period in time that naturally belonged to the feminine divine, but was being suppressed and held down by a patriarchal framework that refused to let go of its time. Firmly in the in the Iron Age, humanity turned away from natural and direct spiritual connection and instead relied upon translation of what should be believed, which is being given by self-proclaimed representatives. But throughout the age, there are signs of a rebellion brewing. And as we move closer to the end of the age, or as we moved, a return to the individual's direct and unique understanding and connection to spirit has been rising at an accelerated pace. It's gaining more and more momentum with each passing year, like we're slowly waking up and beginning to remember once again who we are and where we come from. The time is fast approaching where the transition into the age of Aquarius will be complete. Humanity has moved beyond the Iron Age, which is demonstrated by the rapid acceleration of innovation and technological advancement. Also, things like scientific attempts to pierce the veil of time and space, travel to other worlds, communicate with other worlds, and things like open discussion and acceptance of otherworldly life. Topics like disclosure or spiritual awakening and the mainstreaming of individual thought, increased creativity, beliefs, and perceptions of reality. These are all evidence of us ascending upward out of the Iron Age. We are a long way from the next Golden Age. But in terms of the great year that extends across the 24 to 25,000 or so years, we are firmly inside the early few degrees into the Bronze Age, in which darkness gives way to light and ascension towards the Silver Age and then the Golden Age are ahead of us. Humanity's departure out of the previous golden age of 11,000 BC, that included super advanced civilizations such as Atlantis, were times of truth and spiritual perfection that ultimately declined. But then, as with any cycle, the decline reaches its rock bottom, and immediately the ascension begins again. We are currently ascendant within this cycle. The fog of control and suppression is beginning to clear. The veil is being lifted, and humanity has an opportunity to gain a deeper and more objective awareness of what's been going on in the ages before us and how humanity has been conditioned to forget itself. As the age of Aquarius progresses and matures, humanity will leave behind the concepts of war and structures that are imposed upon us by others. Instead, an individualized belief system coupled with a collective support system will develop. In its infancy, Aquarian humans will feel lighter, physically, mentally, and spiritually. We will stretch our collective consciousness to accept and live in rapidly changing times where reality is entirely different to anything we've experienced, but somehow it feels kind of familiar. And the voluminous breakthroughs in technology, science, artificial, and natural intelligence will completely revolutionize life and the existence of all of humanity. There will be great challenges for us during this new age, but there will also be great rewards. And the feminine divine that was defeated in the age of Aries and then further suppressed throughout the age of Pisces will regain sovereignty and reign over our new reality. The new age will last until around the year 4300. It will be increasingly a time for brotherhood, genius, and science. Things like immortality, hopes, dreams, wishes, revolution, and electric sensations. More and more as we continue on our way towards the new golden age of utopia. And because everything in life appears as a cycle, not a perfect circle that repeats itself exactly as it was before, but a spiraling cycle that indeed spirals back upward to a golden age. But a golden age that's new and unknown and probably emerging from the collective awareness of what came before it. And that makes me wonder if the new golden age will be so supremely glorious and knowledgeable that it allows us to learn from the mistakes of our previous golden age ancestors and perhaps live in even greater divine existence than we ever did before. Perhaps that's the point. Will it be like the fruit tree that grew from a bulb and sprouted and flowered and fruited and then suffered decay and demise before it was absorbed into the ground and renewed itself to become a glorious new tender stalk of life again? I will say this. The great thing about believing in reincarnation is that we know we will be back for longer and longer times each time we return to see the beauty of the utopian realm unfold. I can't speak for anyone else, but I'm very much looking forward to it myself. If you'd like to delve a little deeper into the spiritual side of what I do, then check out my YouTube channel. It's called Ellie Dreams and Under. Every week, you'll find bonus content related to the show. There's also tarot, horoscopes, astrology, and analysis of people and circumstances, and also events. I'm also on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, Patreon, and Shopify. All of my social media links can be found at Ellie Dreams and Under on YouTube. There's also behind the scenes and episode extensions available for my members on Patreon. Check out Ellie Dreams and Under on Patreon for access to this extra content. And thank you to everyone who's joined me today on one of KJRA's broadcasting platforms. That includes Facebook, X, Rumble, and pretty much every podcast forum. But the best place to hang out with like-minded watchers, experiencers, spiritualists, and weirdos of the best variety, like me, is at KJRA. Just click on live.kjradb.com and use promo code Ellie for 30% off your subscription. Well, that's it for today. It's been a pleasure. Until next time.